Dot and Dash. Story by Fiona, Perrella, illustrations by The Thought Challengers. Dot and Dash knew that their father was different. It wasn't that he couldn't hear properly. It wasn't that every time he wanted to talk to him he had to shout into his giant ear horn. It wasn't just that he was an inventor, and there was always something exploding in his laboratory. Dad was different because when something went wrong, something didn't work, or he made a mistake, he didn't give up or complain. He just went into his giant bird cage and sat and thought, what have I learned? What am I going to do differently? Dad's only complaint was that he couldn't hear the birds sing. Whenever Dot and Dash made a mistake, failed, or couldn't do something, their dad would sit and ask, well, let's see, what have you learned? And what are you going to do differently? Dot and Dash lived in a big old house in a bustling city where the days were very light and the nights were dark. When the sun went down, Mum and Dad would light all the gas lamps. They were dirty and smelly. One evening, Auntie Annie came to dinner. She was a grand old lady who sang as she walked. She loved the opera and dressed in colourful clothes. Her long hair was piled on the top of her head and had different decorations in it every time she visited. As they sat down for dinner, Dot smelt smoke. Dash saw a flame. Auntie Annie screamed, Mum gasped, and Dot jumped up, grabbed the water jug and poured it over Auntie Annie's burning hair. Dad sat there while everyone made a fuss and said, why? What if? What could be done differently? There must be a better way to light a home. That night, after Dot and Dash went to bed, Dad went into his laboratory and looked for a better way. And the next night, and the next week, and the next month, and a year later, Dad still hadn't found a better way to light a home. There was the light bulb. It didn't last very long. What he needed was something to conduct electricity for longer than a day. Grandma said, for goodness sakes, Tommy, I have light. Why don't you try and invent something else? Why can't you invent me something that washes the dishes? Grandpa said, I don't need light. I go to bed early. Why can't you invent me one of those carts that I don't have to pedal, like your friend Henry? Mum smiled and brought him a nice cup of tea. Each time an experiment failed, Dad would sit in his bird cage and think, what a shame I can't hear my lovely birds sing. Then he thought, what have I learnt? What can I do differently? He asked the help of the engineers. They couldn't help. He asked the help of the metallurgists. They couldn't help. He asked the help of the zoologists. They couldn't help. He asked the help of the builders. They couldn't help. And he asked the help of the botanists. They said they'd try. One travelled north, one travelled west. One travelled east and one travelled south. Dot and Dash watched as they filled the birdcage with plants. They picked, they broke, they cleaned, they tested, and they retested. My idea is there may be a plant that can conduct electricity longer than a day. 6,000 plants went into the laboratory. Each one cut, each one tested, retested, and each one failed. None would light longer than a night. Each time an experiment failed, Dad would sit in his bird cage and think, what a shame I can't hear my lovely birds sing. Then he thought, what have I learned? What can I do differently? Everyone knew that Dad was trying to make a better light bulb. The journalist came to see Dad. Are you tired of failing? How can you explain all these mistakes? Surely there are other things that need inventing. Don't you think you've wasted enough time on this idea? What's wrong with gaslight? Dad said, you see failure. What you don't see is everything I have learnt along the way. I've learnt that there's over 6,000 ways not to do it. so I must be getting close to making it work. So he went back to his laboratory. 50 nights and 50 days later, jumping sandwiches, it's bamboo. The bamboo filament had lasted 50 days. Dot and Dash knew that most dads would stop there, but not their dad. Dad sat in his birdcage to think, what have I learned? What could I do differently? The next time he changed the filament shape, like a horseshoe, and now it lasted 60 days. A ceremony was held and everyone watched Dot and Dash as they flipped the switch which turned on electric lights to their neighbourhood. Mum smiled, Auntie Annie sang, Grandma and Grandpa clapped, and Dad celebrated his achievements.